In the remaining couple of months that Biden still has in the White House, can he shift the Pentagon to spend and move the $6 billion in untapped funds that the US currently has, already approved by Congress, to supply Ukraine with as much hardware as possible before Trump comes into office? Because if that could be done, if the US could sort of de-bureaucratize all of this and speed it up a bit, it would help to get Ukraine through the winter.
Well, that's the sound of missiles flying over Ukraine in the early hours of this morning as Russia launched one of the largest attacks on the country since the beginning of the war. Around 120 missiles and 90 drones were launched from Russia, hitting the capital Kyiv as well as targets in the Dnipro, Donetsk, Lviv and Odessa regions. At least 9 civilians were killed. Dozens more were injured. The attack targeted Ukraine's energy network, with its largest thermal power plants and transformer substations in the west, and the centre of the country being hit. Many regions lost power for a while. Well, let's get more on that and bring in Dr. Jamie Shea, who's a former Deputy Assistant Secretary General for Emerging Security Challenges at NATO. Good afternoon to you, Jamie.
And good afternoon to you too.
Good to have you with us. Let me ask you first of all about that overnight attack on Ukraine. At least 9 people killed, and as we were hearing there, significant damage to Ukraine's energy infrastructure. What do you make of the timing of this, just as we've got so much uncertainty about the future of Western support for Ukraine?
Indeed, I think Putin knows that winter is on its way and he wants to make life as miserable as he possibly can. He did this last winter too for Ukrainians by launching all of these attacks, not just on the energy infrastructure, although that's a key target. He's also looking to try to crimp or nip in the bud Ukraine's defense industries as Ukraine tries to ramp up its own production and make itself less reliant upon the United States. And clearly also civilian targets as well, civilian buildings and the rest. He clearly wants Ukraine to be in the weakest possible position and as demoralized as he can get it ahead of any possible peace negotiations next year. And he may also want to try to put pressure on the EU by forcing millions more Ukrainians, in addition to the 7 million who have already left their homes and who have fled to the EU, which obviously would be a massive influx, putting a lot of countries, Poland, Germany, maybe even the UK, under pressure to try to absorb these additional refugees.
President Putin has, we understand, spoken to the incoming President Donald Trump. He's also spoken to Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, sparking some anger from Ukraine's leadership. Do you think that this could be simply intended to try to strengthen his hand, as there seems to be a growing talk of some future negotiations? Or do you think this is just part of the ongoing onslaught?
Excuse me. Yeah, Putin went to great pains after the call with German Chancellor Scholz to say that it was the Germans who wanted the call, not him. So he clearly wants to sort of show that he's not isolated, like at the recent BRICS summit, that people are willing to talk with him and to engage with him. And calls are not necessarily bad if people send a very clear message of Western resolve, the willingness to support Ukraine, and tell Putin that he has to withdraw or make concessions of his own. But so far, at least from what I get from this call, he didn't really achieve very much, because all that Putin is doing is using these calls to repeat his maximalist positions. For example, that he has to keep all of the land that Russia is currently occupying and more, that NATO has to rescind the invitation to Ukraine to be a member of the alliance one day, that Ukraine has to demilitarize and not have nuclear weapons, although that's not really an issue. So if Putin is using these calls simply to say, I don't really want to negotiate, I feel that I'm on a roll, I'm conquering territory, my troops are advancing, I'm in a stronger position, and Ukraine is in a weaker position every day, then it's not quite clear how these calls are really going to lead the way to meaningful negotiations in the future.
Yeah, I mean, Donald Trump, of course, during his campaign famously said that he was going to solve the war in 24 hours. Now, recently, he has spoken to President Zelensky of Ukraine. Zelensky has been sounding rather more positive about the prospect of a second Trump presidency, saying that he believes that it could end the war sooner rather than later. I mean, do you think that Zelensky is actually warming towards the idea of some kind of negotiations, or do you think he's just trying not to annoy Donald Trump at this stage?
Well, I think that really is the question. My sense is that it's a tactical move, really, on behalf of Zelensky. But he knows, of course, at the moment that Ukraine is in a weak position. Nobody could deny that. The Russians are advancing, the Ukrainians, undermanned and under-equipped, waiting for the new Western weapons to arrive, are clearly having trouble holding the front. So Ukraine is certainly not winning the war at the moment, and that's a reality that Zelensky has to take into account. The country is tired, and he does look at Europe and the United States, and he sees the Ukraine fatigue and the uncertainty about the future. On the other hand, he probably feels that he can get Trump involved as a strong man, a strong negotiator who doesn't want to be humiliated by Putin or allow the US simply to sort of abandon Ukraine after the billions of dollars that the US has spent over the last 2.5 years. So he probably feels that, once Trump is involved in negotiations with Putin, he'll see that Putin is not an easy customer, and that hopefully he can sort of get Trump to promise to continue to deliver weapons to Ukraine to keep Ukraine in a strong position while the negotiations unfold. It can't be done in 24 hours, but at least he feels that if Trump, can go up against Putin and not come off too well from the process, then Trump will change his mind vis-a-vis Russia and on Ukraine and become a much, much, much stronger supporter of Ukraine going forward. Once bitten, twice shy, I think is probably what we'd say in English. But of course, it's a bit of a gamble, Carol. So we'll have to wait and see if it really does play out that way. But, Ukraine is not winning on the battlefield. So diplomacy is the only option. And he has to hope that somehow Trump will sort of pull his chestnuts out of the fire.
Ukraine and the war there is obviously going to be a really important issue at this gathering of G20 leaders in Rio. And although it's not a huge part of the formal agenda, there are clearly going to be a lot of bilaterals focused on this. We're hearing that Keir Starmer is going to be pushing Joe Biden at one of his last major global appearances, to give the go-ahead for these Storm Shadow missiles to be fired deep into Russia. Do you think that there is any prospect that the outgoing president could actually do this?
Well, I wish he would from a personal point of view, but he has been resisting this for months and months and months, despite considerable pressures. For example, when Keir Starmer visited Washington, or the NATO summit back in July in Washington, and so far Biden and his team around him have resisted. So I don't see that he will, if you like, give permission for the US long-range missiles, the so-called ATACMS, to be used against Russian targets. But it would be a significant thing if he at least said to France and the UK, which operate, as you said, the Storm Shadow system, the French call it Scalp, permission from Washington that they could then allow Zelensky to use their weapons. Because clearly the Russians at the moment are not only building up for a bigger offensive, but, for example, in a place like Tatarstan, they've got a drone production facility which is churning out hundreds of drones a month to attack Ukrainian targets. So if Ukraine had the wherewithal to attack some of these targets, it could take the pressure off considerably. But Carol, I think the other message, though, for the G20 is that, in the remaining couple of months that Biden still has in the White House, can he shift the Pentagon to spend and move the $6 billion in untapped funds that the US currently has, already approved by Congress, to supply Ukraine with as much hardware as possible before Trump comes into office? Because if that could be done, if the US could sort of de-bureaucratize all of this and speed it up a bit, it would help to get Ukraine through the winter. So I think there'll be a lot of emphasis on, put your foot on the accelerator on US supplies where you've got the money while you still have the political opportunity.
Dr. Jamie Shea, NATO's former Deputy Assistant Secretary General for Emerging Security Challenges. Really good to talk to you. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Dano Lukisi is a former Deputy Foreign Minister of Ukraine and Director of the Kyiv Security Forum and joins us now. Hello, Danilo.
Hello, Carol. Thank you for your invitation.
Well, good to have you with us. I believe that you were in Kyiv overnight when those attacks happened. Just tell us your experience of that.
The sound that your audience have heard is very familiar. That was actually what we've heard tonight, and this is the sound of almost every night we spend here in Kyiv together with my family and my friends and many Ukrainians. So this is an ordinary sound what we hear almost every night.
What can you tell us about the scale of the damage that's been done across Ukraine and, of course, the loss of life?
That was yet another horrific attack launched by Russia and waged by Russia against Ukraine. They say that this is a massive combined attack, the largest since September this year. Unfortunately, we have 9 innocent Ukrainians killed tonight, and with many damages and many harm caused by the Russian missiles and killer drones against Ukrainian civil infrastructure. So the outcome of these attacks are very dramatic and horrible, and the assault is deplorable, as rightly your foreign secretary said. And they continue to attack Ukrainian civil infrastructure, and they don't hide that civil and energy infrastructure is their main target.
And do you think this was just about attacking Ukraine's energy supplies just as the winter is about to hit? Or do you think the timing of this could also be tied to some of the flurry of global politics that we've seen around Ukraine? We have had, of course, the election of Donald Trump and his previous comments about solving the war in 24 hours. We've had the phone call between the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz and President Putin. We've had your own president speaking to Donald Trump.
Well, Carol, I believe that you are completely right. We have a number of reasons that you mentioned on the table. First of all, the Russians, as I said, they do not hide that their major target is Ukraine's energy infrastructure. By doing so, they try to undermine the Ukrainian morale and to have their benefits on the battleground. Let me mention, you might have known that person, Mr. Dmitry Medvedev, the former so-called president of Russia. He bluntly said that that was their target this night. So on one hand, they attack the civil infrastructure, doing yet another war crime. Simply that this is it. This is the war crime launched by Russia. And this is a clear response of the Kremlin to those who try to exercise yet another tactic of appeasement of Kremlin and trying to establish some kind of talks with Putin. This is an answer to the notorious in my opinion, not quite clear and understandable phone calls conducted recently and attempts to establish some kind of dialogue with the war criminal Putin.
We've got your President Zelensky preparing to unveil the details of this 10-point resilience plan. Do you have any insight into what is exactly he's likely to say? Do you think this is going to be based on the plan that he put forward at various international meetings earlier this year?
I'm not aware of any details of the plan which is already announced by President Zelensky and which he is going to deliver in the coming week. But I definitely hope that this plan will include the elements that will help unite the Ukrainian nation in our struggle against the Russian genocidal aggression, and those steps that will enforce our ability to deter the aggression, both military and economic. So we all look forward to his plan, believing that these points will contribute to Ukraine's victory.
So what would you like to see in that plan then? What do you think are the key elements to helping you to withstand attacks like the one that the country has suffered overnight?
National unity, stronger defense, division of economic recovery, justice. These elements are important and should be included in the plan, in their concrete forms, in the concrete decisions or suggestions or proposals that might be delivered and suggested by the president.
Dano Lukisi, really good to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Dano Lukisi is a former Deputy Foreign Minister of Ukraine.